A Critical History of Greek Philosophy. Author name W.T. Stace. Recorded by Anisha Hamid Subha. Table of Contents. Plato. 15. The Stoics, Logic, Physics, Ethics. 18. Transition to Neoplatonism. Index of Subjects, Index of Names. Chapter 1. The Origins and Development of Greek Philosophy. Chapter 2. Thales. Anaximander, Anaximenes, Other Ionic Thinkers. Chapter 3. Chapter 4. Xenophans, Parmenides, Zeno. Chapter 5. Chapter 6. Chapter 7. Chapter 8. Chapter 9. Chapter 10. Chapter 11. Chapter 12. Chapter 13. Chapter 14. Chapter 15. Chapter 16, Chapter 17, Chapter 18, Chapter 19. Subject Index B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W. Index of Names B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, R, S, T, U, W, X, Z. Glasgow, printed at the University Press by Robert Mackenzie and Corporation Limited. New York's On Philosophy by Benedetto Cross. London, Macmillan and Co. Limited. Section 1. General Terms of Use and Redistribution. Project Gutenberg TM Electronic Works. Section 2. Information about the mission of Project Gutenberg TM. Section 3. Information about the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. Section 4. Information about donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. Chapter 1. XII Plato 164. 1. Life and Writings 165. 2. The Theory of Knowledge 177. 3. Dialectic or the Theory of Ideas 183. 4. Physics or the Theory of Existence 207. A. The Doctrine of the World 207. B. The Doctrine of the Human Soul 211. XIV. V. Ethics 217. A. Of the Individual 217. B. The State 225. VI. Views upon Art 229. VII. Critical Estimate of Plato's Philosophy 234. XIII. Aristotle. Life, Writings and General Character of his Work 249. Logic 260. Metaphysics 261. Physics or the Philosophy of Nature 288. Ethics A. The Individual 314. The State 320. VI. Aesthetics or the Theory of Art 325. VII. Critical Estimate of Aristotle's Philosophy 331. XIV. The General of Post-Aristotelian Philosophy 339. Chapter 2. XV The Stoics, logic, physics, ethics, 344. XVI, the Epicureans, physics, ethics, 354. XVII, the skeptics, Philo, the new academy, later skepticism, 361. Chapter 3, XVIII, Transition to Neoplatonism, 368. XIX, the Neoplatonist, 372. Chapter 4, Index of Subjects, 378. Chapter 5, Index of Names, 382. A Critical History of Greek Philosophy. Chapter 6, Chapter I, The Idea of Philosophy in Greek General. Chapter 7, The Origins and Development of Greek Philosophy. It is natural that at the commencement of any study, one should be expected to say what the subject matter of the study is. Botany is the knowledge of plants, astronomy of the heavenly bodies, geology of the rocks of the earth's crust. What then is the special sphere of philosophy? Philosophy. What is philosophy about? Now it is not as easy to give a concise definition of philosophy as it is of the other sciences. In the first place, the content of philosophy has differed considerably in different periods of history. In general, the tendency has been to narrow down the scope of the subject as knowledge advanced, to exclude from philosophy what was formerly included in it. Thus, in the time of Plato, physics and astronomy were included as parts of philosophy, whereas now they constitute separate sciences. This, however, is not an insurmountable difficulty. What chiefly militates against the effort to frame a definition is that the precise content of philosophy is differently viewed by different schools of thoughts. Thus, a definition of to philosophy which a follower of Herbert Spencer might frame would be unexpectable to an Hegelian, and the Hegelian definition would be rejected by the Spencerian. If we are to include in our definitions some such phrase as the knowledge of the absolute, while this might suit some philosophers, others would deny that there is any absolute at all. Another school would say that there may be an absolute, but that is unknowable, so that philosophy cannot be knowledge of it. Yet another school would tell us that whether there is or is not an absolute, whether it is or is not knowable, the knowledge of it is in any case useless and ought not to be sought. Hence, no definition of philosophy can be appreciated without some knowledge of the special tenets of the various schools. In a word, the proper place to give a definition is not at the beginning of the study of philosophy, but at the end of it. Then, with all views before us, we might be able to decide the question. I shall make no attempt, therefore, to place before you a precise definition, but perhaps the same purpose will be served if I pick out some of the leading traits of philosophy which serve to distinguish it from other branches of knowledge and illustrate them by enumerating, but without any attempt at completeness, some of the chief problems which philosophers have usually attempted to solve. And firstly, philosophy is distinguished from another branches of knowledge by the fact that whereas these each take some particular portion of the universe for their study, philosophy does not specialize in this way, but deals with the universe as a whole. The universe is one, and the ideal knowledge of it would be one, but the principles of specialization and division of tree labor apply here as elsewhere. And so astronomy takes for its subject that proportion of the universe which we call the heavenly bodies. Botany specializes in plant life, psychology in the facts of the minds, and so on. But philosophy does not deal with this or that particular sphere of being, but with being as such. It seeks to see the universe as a single coordinated system of things. It might be described as the science of things in general. The world, in its most universal aspects, is its subjects. All sciences tend to generalize, they reduce multitudes of particular facts to single general laws. Philosophy carries the process to its highest limit. It generalizes to the utmost. It seeks to view the entire universe in the light of the fewest possible general principles. In the light, if possible, a single ultimate principle. It is a consequence of this that the special sciences take their subject matter and much of their contents for granted, whereas philosophy seeks to trace everything back to its ultimate grounds. It may be thought that this description of the sciences is incorrect, is not the essential maxim of modern science to assume nothing, to take nothing for granted, to assert nothing without demonstration, to prove all? This is no doubt true within certain limits, but beyond those limits it does not hold good. All the sciences take quite for granted certain principles and facts which are, for them, ultimate. To investigate this is the portion of the philosopher, and philosophy thus takes up the trade of knowledge where the science stop it. It begins where they end. It investigates what they take as a matter of course. Let us consider some examples of this. The science of geometry deals with the laws of space, but it takes 4. Space just as it finds it in common experience. It takes space for granted. No geometrician asks what space is. This, then, will be a problem for philosophy. Moreover, geometry is founded upon certain fundamental propositions which it asserts, being self evident, require no investigation. These are called axioms. That two straight lines cannot enclose a space and that equals being added to equals, the results are equal, are common examples. Into the ground of these axioms, the geometrician does not inquire. That is the business of philosophy. Not that philosophers affect to doubt the truth of these axioms, but surely it is a very strange thing and a fact quite worthy of study. That there are some statements of which we feel that we must give the most laborious proofs, and others in the case of which we feel no such necessity. How is it that some propositions can be self evident and others must be proved? What is the ground of this distinction? And when one comes to think of it, it is a very extraordinary property of mind that it should be able to make the most universal and unconditional statements about things without a jot of evidence or proof. When we say that two straight lines cannot enclose a space, we do not mean merely that this has been found true in regard to all the particular pairs of straight lines with which we have tried the experiment. We mean that it never can be and never has been otherwise. We mean that a million years ago, two straight lines did not enclose a space, and that it will be the same a million years hence, and that it is just as true as those stars, if there are any, which are invisible even to the greatest telescopes. But we have no experience of what will 5 happen in million years hence, or of what can take place among those remote stars. And yet we assert with absolute confidence that our axiom is and must be equally true everywhere and at all times. Moreover, we do not found this on probabilities gathered from experience. Nobody would make experiments or use telescopes to prove such axioms. How is it that they are thus self evident, that the mind can make these definite and far reaching assertions without any evidence at all? Geometricians do not consider these questions. They take the facts for granted. To solve these problems is for philosophy. Again, the physical sciences take the existence of matter for granted, but philosophy asks what matter is. At first sight, it might appear that this question is one for the physicist and not for the philosopher. For the problem of the constitution of matter is a well known physical problem, but a little consideration will show that this is quite a different question from the one the philosopher propounds. For even if it be shown that all matter is ether or electricity or vortex atoms or other such, this does not help us in our special problem. For these theories, even if proved, only teach us that the different kinds of matter are forms of some one physical existence. But what we want to know is what physical existence itself is. To prove that one kind of matter is really another kind of matter does not tell us what is the essential nature of matter. That therefore is a problem not of science but of philosophy. In the same way, all the sciences take the existence of the universe for granted, but philosophy seeks to know why it is there is a universe at all. Is it 6 true, for example, that there is some single ultimate reality which produces all things? And if so, what sort of reality is it? Is it matter or mind? Or something different from both? Is it good or evil? And if it is good, how is it that there is evil in the world? Moreover, every science except the purely mathematical sciences assumes the truth of the law of causation. Every student of logic knows that this is the ultimate canon of the sciences, the foundation of them all. If we did not believe in the truth of the law of causation, namely, that everything which has a beginning has a cause, and that in the same circumstances the same things invariably happen, all the sciences would at once crumble to dust. In every scientific investigation, this truth is assumed. If we ask the zoologist how he knows that all camels are herbivorous, he will no doubt point in the first instance to experience. The habits of many thousands of camels have been observed, but this only proves that those particular camels are herbivorous. How about the millions that have never been observed at all? He can only appeal to the law of causation. The camel's structure is such that it cannot digest meat. It is a case of cause and effect. How do we know that water always freezes at 0 degrees centigrade? Neglecting questions of pressure, etc. How do we know that this is true at those regions of the earth where no one has ever been to see? Only because we believe that in the same circumstances the same thing always happens, that like causes always produce like effects. But how do we know the truth of this law of causation itself? Science does not consider the question. It traces its assertions back to this law but goes no further. 7. Its fundamental canon it takes for granted the grounds of causation. Why it is true and how we know it is true are therefore philosophical questions. One may be tempted to inquire whether many of these questions, especially those connected with the ultimate reality, do not transcend human faculties altogether, and whether we had not better confine our inquiries to matters that are not too high for us. One may question whether it is possible for finite minds to comprehend the infinite. Now, it is very right that such questions should be asked, and it is essential that a correct answer should be found. But for the present, there is nothing to say about this matter, except that these questions themselves constitute one of the most important problems of philosophy, though it is one which, as a matter of fact, has scarcely been considered in full until modern times. The Greeks did not raise the question, footnote 2, and as this is itself one of the problems of philosophy, it will be well to start with an open mind. The question cannot be decided offhand, but must be thoroughly investigated. That the finite mind of man cannot understand the infinite is one of those popular dogmatic assertions which are bruited about from mouth to mouth as if they were self evident and so come to tyrannize over men's minds. But for the most part, those who make this statement have never thoroughly sifted the grounds of it, but simply take it as something universally admitted and trouble no further about it. But at the very least, we should first know exactly what, 8, we mean by such terms as mind, finite, and infinite. And we shall not find that our difficulties end even there. Footnote 2. The reasoning of the skeptics and others no doubt involved this question, but they did not consider it in its peculiar modern form. Philosophy then deals with the universe as a whole and it seeks to take nothing for granted. A third characteristic may be noted as especially important, though here no doubt we are trenching upon matters upon which there is no such universal agreement. Philosophy is essentially an attempt to rise from sensuous to pure, that is, non sensuous thought. This requires some explanation. We are conscious so to speak, of two different worlds, the external physical world and the internal mental world. If we look outwards, we are aware of the former. If we turn our gaze inwards upon our own minds, we become aware of the latter. It may appear incorrect to say that the external world is purely physical, for it includes other minds. I am aware of your mind, and this is to me part of the world which is external to me. But I am not now speaking of what we know by inference, but only of what we directly perceive. I cannot directly perceive your mind, but only your physical body. in the last resort, it will be found that I am aware of the existence of your mind only by inference from perceived physical facts, such as the movements of your body and the sounds that issue from your lips. The only mind which I can immediately perceive is my own. There is then a physical world external to us and an internal mental world. Which of these will naturally be regarded as the most real? Men will regard as the most real that which is the most familiar, that which they came first into, 9. Contact with, and have most experience of. And this is unquestionably the external material world. When a child is born, it turns its eyes to the light, which is an external physical thing. Gradually, it gets to know different objects in the room. At it comes to know its mother, but its mother is, in the first instance, a physical object, a body. It is only long afterwards that its mother becomes for the child a mind or a soul. In general, all our earliest experiences are of the material world. We can come to know of the mental world only by introspection, and the habitat of introspection comes in youth or manhood only, and to many people it hardly comes at all. In all those early impressionable years, therefore, when our most durable ideas of the universe are formed, we are concerned almost exclusively with the material world. The mental world with which we are much less familiar consequently tends to appear to all of us something comparatively unreal, a world of shadows. The bent of our minds becomes materialistic. What I have said of the individual is equally true of the race. Primitive man does not brood over the facts of his own mind. Necessity compels him to devote most of his life to the acquisition of food and to warding off the dangers which continually threaten him from other physical objects. And even among ourselves, the majority of men have to spend most of their time upon considering various aspects of things external to them by the individual training of each man and by long hereditary habit, then it comes about that men tend to regard the physical world as more real than the mental. 10. Abundant evidences of this are to be found in the structure of human language. We seek to explain what is strange by means of what is well known. We try to express the unfamiliar in terms of the familiar. We shall find that language always seeks to express the mental by the analogy of the physical. We speak of a man as a clear thinker. Clear is an attribute of physical objects. Water is clear if it has no extraneous matter in it. We say that a man's ideas are luminous, thus thinking a metaphor from physical light. We talk of having an idea at the back of the mind. At the back of. Has the mind got a front and a back? We are thinking of it as if it were a physical thing in space. We speak of mental habits of attention. Attention means stretching or turning the mind in a special direction. We reflect. Reflection means bending our thoughts back upon themselves. But literally speaking, only physical objects can be stretched, turned, and bent. Whenever we wish to express something mental, we do it by a physical analogy. We talk of it in terms of physical things. This shows how deep rooted our materialism is. If the mental world were more familiar and real to us, then the material language would have been constructed on the opposite principle. The earliest words of language would have expressed mental facts, and we should afterwards have tried to express physical things by means of mental analogies. In the East, one commonly hears Oriental idealism contrasted with Western materialism. Such phrases may possess a certain relative truth, but if they mean that there is in the East or anywhere else in the world, 11, a race of men who are naturally idealists, they are nonsense. Materialism is ingrained in all men. We Easterns or Westerns are born materialists. Hence, when we try to think of objects which are commonly regarded as non material, such as God or the soul, it requires continual effort, a tremendous struggle to avoid picturing them as material things. It goes utterly against the grain. Perhaps hundreds of thousands of years of hereditary materialism are against us. The popular idea of ghost will illustrate this. Those who believe in ghosts, I suppose, regard them as some sort of disembodied souls. The pictures of ghosts in magazines show them as if composed of matter, but matter of some thin kind, such as vapor. Certain Indian systems of thought, which are by way of regarding themselves as idealistic, nevertheless teach that thought or mind is an extremely subtle kind of matter, far subtler than any ever dealt with by physicists and chemist. This is very interesting because it shows that the authors of such ideas feel vaguely that it is wrong to think of thought as if it were matter, but being unable to think of it in any other way owing to man's ingrained materialism, they seek to palliate their sin by making it thin matter. Of course, this is just an absurd as the excuse made by the mother of an illegitimate child that it was a very small one. This thin matter is just as material as lead or brass. And such systems are purely materialistic, but they illustrate the extraordinary difficulty that the ordinary mind experiences in attempting to rise from sensuous to non sensuous thinking. They illustrate the ingrained materialism of man. The natural human materialism is also the cause 12 of mysticism and symbolism. A symbolic thought necessarily contains two terms, the symbol and the reality which it symbolizes. The symbol is always a sensuous or material object or the mental image of such an object, and the reality is always something non sensuous. Because the human mind finds it such an incredible struggle to think nonsensuously, it seeks to help itself by symbols. It takes a material thing and makes it stand for the non material thing which it is too weak to grasp. Thus, we talk of God as the light of lights. No doubt, this is a very natural expression of the religious consciousness and it has its meaning, but it is not the naked truth. Light is the physical existence, and God is no more light than He is heat or electricity. People talk of symbolism as if it were a very high and exalted thing. They say, what a wonderful piece of symbolism. But in truth, symbolism is the mark of an informed mind. It is the measure of our weakness and not our strength. Its root is immaterialism, and it is produced and propagated by those who are unable to rise above a materialistic level. Now, philosophy is essentially the attempt to get beyond this sort of symbolic and mystical thinking, to get at the naked truth, to grasp what lies behind the symbol as it is in itself. These inferior modes of thought are a help to those who are themselves below their level, but are a hindrance to those who seek to reach the highest level of truth. It is often said that philosophy is a very difficult and obtuse ab- abstruse subject. Its difficulty lies almost wholly in the struggle to think nonsensiously. Whenever we, 13, come to anything in philosophy that seems beyond us, we shall generally find that the root of the trouble is that we are trying to think nonsensuous objects in a sensuous way. That is, we are trying to form mental pictures and images of them, for all mental pictures are composed of sensuous materials, and hence no such picture is adequate for a pure thought. It is impossible to exaggerate this difficulty. Even the greatest philosophers have succumbed to it. We shall constantly have to point out that when a great thinker such as Parmenides or Plato fails and begins to flounder in difficulties, the reason usually is that though for a time he has attained to pure thought, he has sunk back exhausted into sensuous thinking and has attempted to form mental pictures of what is beyond the power of any such picture to represent, and so has fallen into contradictions. We must keep this constantly in mind in the study of philosophy. In modern times, philosophy is variously divided as into metaphysics, which is the theory of reality, ethics, the theory of the good, and aesthetics, the theory of the beautiful. Modern divisions do not, however, altogether fit in with Greek philosophy, and it is better to let the natural divisions develop themselves as we go on than to attempt to force our material into those molds. If now we look round the world and ask in what countries and what ages the kind of thought we have described has attained a high degree of development, we shall find such a development only in ancient Greece and in modern Europe. There were great civilizations in Egypt, China, Assyria, and so on. They produced art and religion, but no philosophy to speak of. Even 14, ancient Rome added nothing to the world's philosophical knowledge. Its so called philosophers, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, Lucretius produced no essentially new principle. They were merely disciples of Greek schools, whose writings may be full of interest and of noble feeling, but whose essential thoughts contained nothing but already developed by the Greeks. The case of India is more doubtful. Opinions may differ as to whether India ever had any philosophy. The Upanishads contain religio-philosophical thinking of a kind, and later we have the six so-called schools of philosophy. The reasons why Indian thought is not usually included in histories of philosophy are as follows. Firstly, philosophy in India has never separated itself from religious and practical needs. The ideal of knowledge for its own sake is rarely to be found. Knowledge is desired merely as a means towards salvation. Philosophy and science, said Aristotle, have their roots in wonder, the desire to know and understand for the sole sake of knowing and understanding. But the roots of Indian thought lie in the anxiety of the individual to escape from the ills and calamities of existence. This is not the scientific but practical spirit. It gives birth to religions but not to philosophies. Of course, it is a mistake to imagine that philosophy and religion are totally separate and have no community. They are, in fact, fundamentally akin, but they are also distinct. Perhaps the truest view is that they are identical in substance but different in form. The substance, including substance of both, is the absolute reality and the relation of all things, including men, to that reality. But whereas philosophy presents this subject matter scientifically in 15, the form of pure thought, religion gives it in the form of sensuous pictures, myths, images, and symbols. And this gives us the second reason why Indian thought is more properly classed as religious than philosophical. It seldom or never rises from sensuous to pure thought. It is poetical rather than scientific. It is content with symbols and metaphors in place of rational explanations, and all this is a mark of the religious, rather than the philosophical presentation or the truth. For example, the main thought of the Upanishads is that the entire universe is derived from a single, changeless, eternal, infinite being called Brahman or Paramatman. When we come to the crucial question how the universe arises out of this being, we find such passages as this: as the colors in the flame or the red hot iron proceed their form 1,000-fold, so do all beings proceed from the unchangeable and return again to it. Or again, as the web issues from the spider, as little sparks proceed from fire, so from the one soul proceed all living animals, all worlds, all the gods, and all beings. There are thousands of such passages in Upanishads, but obviously this neither explain nor attempt to explain anything. They are nothing but hollow metaphors. They are poetic rather than scientific. They may satisfy the imagination and the religious feelings, but not rational understanding. Or when again Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita describes himself as the moon among the lunar mansions, the sun among the stars, Meru among the high peaked mountains, it is clear that we are merely piling sensuous image upon sensuous image without any further understanding of what the nature of the absolute being in its own self is. The moon, the sun, Meru are physical sense objects. And this is totally sensuous thinking, whereas the aim of philosophy is to rise to pure thought. In such passages, we are still on the level of symbolism, and philosophy only begins when symbolism has been surpassed. No doubt it is possible to take the line that man's thought is not capable of grasping the infinite as it is in itself and can only fall back upon symbols. But when but then is another question. And at any rate, whether it is or it is not possible to rise from sensuous to pure thought, philosophy is essentially the attempt to do so. Lastly, Indian thought is usually excluded from the history of philosophy because, whatever its character, it lies outside the mainstream of human development. It has been cut off by geographical and other barriers. Consequently, whatever its value in itself, it has exerted little influence upon philosophy in general. The chain is sometimes put forward by Orientals themselves that Greek philosophy came from India, and if this were true, it would greatly affect the statement made in the last paragraph. But it is not true. It used to be believed that Greek philosophy came from the East, but this meant Egypt, and even this theory is now abandoned. Greek culture, especially mathematics and astronomy, owed much to Egypt, but Greece did not owe its philosophy to that source. The view that it did was propagated by Alexandrian priests and others, whose sole motive was that to represent the triumphs of Greek philosophy as borrowed from Egypt, flattered their national vanity. It was a great thing. Wherever they found anything good to say, this must have come from us. A precisely similar motive lies behind the 17 Oriental claim that Greek philosophy came from India. There is not a scrap of evidence for it, and it rests entirely upon the supposed resemblance between the two. But this resemblance is in fact mythical. The whole character of Greek philosophy is European and unoriental to the backbone. The doctrine of reincarnation is usually appealed to. These characteristically Indian doctrine was held by the Pythagoreans, from whom it passed to Empedocles and Plato. The Pythagoreans got it from the Orphic sect, to whom quite possibly it came indirectly from India, although even this is by no means certain and is in fact highly doubtable. But even if this is true, it proves nothing. Reincarnation is of little importance in Greek philosophy, even in Plato, who makes much of it. It is quite unnecessary, essential to the fundamental ideas of his philosophy, and is only artificially connected with them. And the influence of this doctrine upon Plato's philosophy was thoroughly bad. It was largely responsible for leading him into the main error of his philosophy, which it required an Aristotle to correct. All this will be evident when we come to consider the systems of Plato and Aristotle. The origin of Greek philosophy is not to be found in India or Egypt or in any country outside Greece. Greeks themselves were solely responsible for it. It is not as if his history traces back their thought only to a point at which it was already highly developed and cannot explain its beginnings. We know its history from the time, so to speak, when it was in the cradle. In the next two chapters, we shall see that the first Greek attempts at philosophizing were so much the beginnings of a beginner, were so very crude and unformed that it is 18 mere perversity to suppose that they could not make these simple efforts for themselves. From those crude beginnings, we can trace the whole development in detail up to its culmination in Aristotle and beyond. So there is no need to assume foreign influence at any point. Greek philosophy begins in the 6th century before Christ. It begins when men, from the first time, attempted to give a scientific reply to the question, what is the explanation of the world? Before this era, we have, of course, the mythologies, cosmogonies, and theologies of the poets, but they contain no attempt at a naturalistic explanation of things. They belong to the spheres of poetry and religion and not to philosophy. It must not be supposed when we speak of the philosophy of Greece They that we refer only to the mainland of what is now called Greece. Very early in history, Greeks of the mainland migrated to the island of the Aegean, to Sicily, to the south of Italy, to the coast of Asia Minor, and elsewhere, and founded flourishing colonies. The crease of philosophy includes all these places. It is to be thought of rather racially than territorially. It is the philosophy of the men of Greek race wherever they happened to be situated. And in fact, the first period of Greek philosophy deals exclusively with the thoughts of these colonial Greeks. It was not till just before the time of Socrates that philosophy was transplanted to the mainland. Greek philosophy falls naturally into three periods. The first may be roughly described as pre Socratic philosophy, though it does not include the sophists who were both the contemporaries and predecessor of Socrates. This period is the rise of Greek philosophy. 19. Secondly, the period from the Sophists to Aristotle, which includes Socrates and Plato, is the maturity of Greek philosophy, the actual zenith and culmination of which is undoubtedly the system of Aristotle. Lastly, the period of post Aristotelian philosophy constitutes the decline and fall of the national thought. These are not merely arbitrary divisions. Each period has its own special characters, which will be described in the sequel. A few words must be said of the sources of our knowledge of pre Socratic philosophy. If we want to know that what Plato and Aristotle thought about any matter, we have only to consult their works. But the works of the earlier philosophers have not come down to us, except in fragments, and several of them never committed their opinions to writing. Our knowledge of their doctrines is the result of the laborious sifting by scholars of such materials as are available. Luckily, the material has been plentiful. It may be divided into three classes. First come the fragments of the original writings of the philosophers themselves. These are in many cases long and important, in other cases scanty. Secondly, there are the references in Plato and Aristotle. Of these, by far the most important are to be found in the first book of Aristotle's Metaphysics, which is history of philosophy up to his own time, and is the first attempt on record to write a history of philosophy. Thirdly, there is an enormous mass of references, some valuable, some worthless, contained in the works of later but still ancient writers. 20.